Good morning. Our webinar is about to start. Please stand by for a minute as attendees connect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sebastian Perez Ferreiro. I am Managing Editor for News at BNamericas. Today, we will have a discussion on Brazil to understand what's next for Latin America's biggest economy. I will be presenting some of the main discussion topics after Luis Inácio Lula da Silva's victory in the presidential runoff election on October 30th. And then Rogerio Gelmayer, BNamericas Brazil Bureau Chief, will hold a conversation with Rodrigo Carvalho, Brazil Managing Partner at Winston & Strawn, Luciano Rostaño, Chief Latin American Strategist at Banco Mizuho do Brasil, and Mario Sergio Lima, Senior Brazil Analyst at Medley Global Advisors. I would like to remind all attendees that you are in listen-only mode. You can ask questions using the box on the right hand of your screens. Let's start with the main conversation topics. Leftist former President Lula defeated right-wing incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in a tight runoff and will return to power on January 1st, when he will once again lead a polarized society while the center-right Congress seeks to curtail his political agenda. Lucas Fernandez, a political analyst at consulting firm BMG Consultores Asociados, told us that if we look at the fiscal side, there is little room for Lula to maneuver to expand social programs considerably. But we will see in 2023 a scenario that is not very common for new incoming administrations, in which Congress will be a sort of opposition, as the center-right and conservative parties will dominate the legislative agenda. The market expects Lula to implement an efficient fiscal policy, but is also awaiting signals from the central bank to understand when an interest rate reduction cycle will begin. The contractionary cycle of fighting inflation will compromise growth, taking practically 2 percentage points off GDP. The forecast for this year is 2.8% growth. The economic expansion will be even more timid next year. 12-month inflation in Brazil reached 12% in June, then dropped to 7% in September. The forecast is for it to hover around 5.4% by the end of the year. Analysts expect Lula to promote changes to develop the country's oil and gas and electric power sectors, but he's not expected to make any radical moves, such as canceling existing contracts or privatization processes. Luan Alves, analyst at VG Research, told us reversing the privatization process of Electrobras, for example, would be of great political and financial cost to the government, not to mention the perception of institutional risk within the sector of greatest credibility amongst the regulatory agencies. We can't rule out, however, agreements with Congress to revise some of the rules approved in Electrobras privatization package, such as contracting natural gas plants in the interior of the country. Measures that impact the power prices, such as changes in tax rates or negotiations to influence the decision of the regulator, will be among the most likely types of political interference, especially in a scenario of skyrocketing prices. In the electric power sector, the expectation is that Lula will maintain the process of diversifying generation sources within Brazil's energy matrix, mainly through wind and solar renewable energies, which have led the expansion of the generation park in recent years. The increased relevance of the climate and environmental agendas should also have implications for Lula's projects for the electric power sector, as Brazil has the potential to be a major player in the global energy transition. In offering her support to Lula's candidacy, former Environmental Minister Marina Silva proposed some measures that would have an impact, such as linking all new energy contracts to greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. The new government is expected to be much more environmentally responsible than its predecessor, the Bolsonaro administration. Lula promised more investments in strategic natural resources, sustainable mining, energy transition, and calling for zero deforestation and zero carbon emissions. The CEO of the World Resources Institute, Ani Dasgupta, said Lula's administration wants to focus on climate issues and protection of the Amazon. But plans for mining might also seek more income from mining exploration. This is one of the guidelines that a technical group from Lula's Workers' Party delivered to the government program team, foreseeing the institution of a tax on the most profitable minerals. The additional tax, called special participation, similar to an existing one in the oil sector, would potentially affect the profits of Vale, which extracts in Carajás one of the ores with the highest iron content in the world. Lula has once again promised a new growth acceleration program, or PAC, like the one created during his previous 2003 to 2010 administrations. He said, on January 1st, I will call all the governors to define priorities in infrastructure. We need to discuss a new growth acceleration program with governors and mayors for the economy to grow again. Lula also defended the participation of public banks in infrastructure and credit for micro entrepreneurs, saying Banco do Brasil, Caixa, and Bundes will finance infrastructure and small entrepreneurs. In the sanitation sector, the privatizations of key firms will move forward. While the president-elect has stated his opposition to privatizing publicly owned firms, local officials such as former infrastructure minister Tarcísio de Freitas, now governor-elect of Sao Paulo, and Eduardo Leite, who won re-election in Rio Grande do Sul, have come out in support of privatizing sanitation firms in their states. Now I will turn things over to Rogério Gelmayer, BNamericas bureau chief in Brazil, who will moderate a conversation with Rodrigo Carvalho, Brazil managing partner at Winston & Strawn, Luciano Rostaño, chief Latin American strategist at Banco Misujo do Brasil, and Mario Sergio Lima, senior Brazil analyst at Medley Global Advisors. I would like to again remind you that questions can be sent using the box on the right hand of your screens. Rogério, over to you.
Thanks, Sebastian, and good morning, guys. So my first question is more general, and I'd like to ask you, Rodrigo, to start by sharing your vision. Can you identify for us three things that are likely to change under Lula administration, and also three things that are likely to stay the same?
Thank you for your question, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think the three things that will likely change are social reforms. So the social agenda historically in PT governments has been a priority. So we'll likely see the reestablishment or the increase of cash transfer programs, educational financing such as FIES, Minha Casa Minha Vida, Bolsa Família / Auxílio Brasil. So that's a trend that we believe will continue in the new administration. Another thing I think will likely change relates to public spending. So we're waiting to see what role BNDES will have in the new administration, whether it's going to transition from this current modeling advisory role to the typical financing role of big infrastructure projects, building the national champions and key infrastructure projects. So I think this will likely change. Another thing that will likely change is foreign policy, especially when it relates to clean energy, ESG agenda. So Lula has a more pragmatic approach towards other countries, other leaders, and I think we'll have a more amenable dialogue with European countries, the tycoons right now, US and China, and certainly we'll see more interaction between the South Cone countries, the Mercosur, especially because of the pink wave in Latin America right now. Things that will remain the same, in my view, I think monetary policy, certainly. We now have an independent central bank. We have Roberto Campos that will probably remain in place until 2024. So they will continue to combat inflation in a more independent way, which I think is good and will likely remain the same. Another thing is governability issues. Like this past elections show that we have a more center-right Congress, and I think there will be challenges towards governability there. Another thing that will remain the same, I think, although all the challenge that we faced in the past administration, I think Brazil remained a stable democracy, right? It's a very loud democracy, but we have stable institutions and not segregated, but independent institutions that make the machine work well, not without noise, but work well in a stable way. I think these are the main issues in my view.
Okay, thanks, Rodrigo. And Luciano, I'd like first for you to open your camera, please. And also, Luciano, can you share your view about the three things that are likely to change under Lula administration, and also three things that are likely to stay at the same level?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me for this great webinar. I agree with Rodrigo. And it's more difficult to say what will remain the same, except for the kind of institutional things that we have in Brazil, like the central bank independence. You have the democracy, the independence of the institutions. This is more difficult to find things that will remain the same, because the difference in terms of the ideology between the new government and this current government. I would say that I expect fiscal policy to remain broadly the same, and I will clarify because this may sound strange. I mean, fiscal policy in the second half of Bolsonaro's administration, I think Lula will keep the same approach. When Brazil was hit by the pandemic, so the government started to increase welfare, social welfare programs, also increase the role of the state in the economy, so providing more support to the economy, fiscal stimulus. So I think we will see this kind of policy continue in Brazil. But the problem is that the environment, or the macroeconomic environment, will be different, right? It's totally understandable that after such a big event like the pandemic, that the government increase expenditure and fiscal support, right? And as we had a V-shaped recovery, the government was able to put its account back on a sustainable trajectory. But the global environment and the domestic environment will be quite different starting next year. We have a global economy slowing down, so Brazil's term of trade will be lower next year. The Brazilian economy will will slow down next year as well, because of the interest rates hikes that the central bank has promoted, and that has a lag effect on the economy. So if the Lula administration keep this kind of a fiscal policy that we saw in the last 2 years, this will bring concerns to investors, because tax revenues will grow at a much slower pace starting next year, and so gross debt is likely to move up again. So this, I think, is something that we will continue to see, but in a very different scenario, which could bring some fiscal challenges. Okay. Also, I think I expect the privatizations that were done by Bolsonaro's administration will not be reversed. So I think Lula will not spend political capital and energy trying to review these privatizations. I think, but on the other hand, I don't expect progress in this agenda with the Lula administration. So this will change. So we will not see a change in terms of privatization that are already done, but we should not expect additional privatizations. Okay. The state will increase the rule in the economy, so we will likely see state-owned banks increasing, expanding credit. Social programs will also increase. So government spending in general will likely increase. Public investment, Lula has said that they will increase public investment, as you guys mentioned in the presentation here. So generally speaking, I think we will see a government that will try to put the state as a driver of economic growth, but in a very tough global environment, and this will bring fiscal concerns. So I think this new government, Lula's administration, will face a more challenging economic environment compared to when he was in power in the 2000s. So that, generally speaking, I think these are the main issues that we will see, or comparing the new administration with the current administrations.
Okay, thanks, Luciano. So Mario, now I'd like to invite you to open your camera, please. And also, can you share your view about the three things that are likely to change under Lula administration, and also things that are likely to remain at the same level?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Well, it's very difficult to pinpoint three things that are going to be different because a lot will be different. I'll try to get a little something that wasn't said before. I think foreign policy will change a lot. Brazil has become the closest that Brazil has ever had as a global pariah with Jair Bolsonaro. So improving relations with the European Union, the UK, even China, and the other Latin American neighbors will be key on Lula's agenda. But also we will probably have what would be very, very strange if you considered what Bolsonaro when he started. Brazil will also improve its relationship with the US, mostly because it's going to be a relationship of two countries and not with a single president that was when Jair Bolsonaro was president. So there will be difference in the foreign policy. We will have a lot of difference in the relationship with the Superior Court or the judiciary system. It was a very tense relationship with Bolsonaro. Lula will rely a lot on this kind of good neighbors relationship with the Supreme Court. Especially, it's going to be way less tense than it was. It's not going to be, of course, a relationship with when they will be together, but at least they will not be facing each other. And also one thing that's very important to highlight that's going to be different is the environmental policy. It was already said by Rodrigo, but I think it's also it's too relevant not to name again as a difference between both. The way that Brazil was perceived when Jair Bolsonaro. First of all, he actually it's not something that came out of the blue. Bolsonaro actually suppressed a lot of the fiscalization and the oversight of the environmental agencies. So it's gonna change. And this is probably one of the major assets that this new government will have in attracting goodwill and investments from abroad. What will remain the same? As Rodrigo also mentioned, the monetary policy will remain the same. of course, if you consider that we have been increasing rates and now we're bound to start a rate cutting cycle, it's not going to be the same. But I mean, it also means that this is a central bank that is independent, that will do whatever it takes to meet its targets. They have shown in the election, we never saw a central bank increasing rates in an election year like this one had, but they had the institutional assets. So, I mean, they could institutionally do their job without having to be concerned with whoever was the president. So there's no shift in that sense. You know, like it's just the change is just because there's a new inflation situation, but not a change in how they perceive the monetary policy. I'll also pinpoint that the relation that we'll probably have the Senate and the lower house president will be the same in the first 2 years, and this is mostly because those guys, the Senate president especially, will benefit a lot from Lula supporting his candidacy. But the lower house president will probably is someone that will gain a lot of power in the last couple of years, mostly due to not because he's that savvy of a politician, but mostly because he has the stranglehold into a part of the budget, which is called the secret budget. But anyway, you slice it, it's something that he has control, and he can manage to get a good support among his peers. So probably Lula, being way more savvy politician than Dilma was, he won't try to face a guy that, even if he couldn't fully get behind, at least you know that you can't have the lower house speaker as your enemy. So he will change. Okay. He will need to. And one thing that I think will remain somewhat the same. It's not. I have to say, it's not. I'm not disagreeing with Luciano. I actually think that it's gonna remain the same. The fiscal policy, not because Lula wants to, but because he needs to. He needs to be a more centrist type of, a more centrist pro-business type of fiscal policy. Because if he doesn't, he could face such a severe crisis. I mean, we're looking at a year where the U.S. may fall into recession, a year where you will have very less global liquidity. So Brazil has to take the right steps. It's not a case of wanting to. I don't think that a PT government would want to take some of the belt tightening measures. They just have to, because if they don't, there's not going to be. They have a very limited window of opportunity, and they cannot mess this up. So I think, well, this is something that's probably going to remain in the same type of line as what Paulo Guedes was proposing. But okay, there are differences. They want to spend some public infrastructure programs. There is a concern, which I think it's a very big risk, in which they can use the public banks to do not the fiscal but the para-fiscal type of policy. This is something that it doesn't seem to me, from all the talks that I get with people from PT, that they fully learned the lessons of the past. So that, but I think by virtue of necessity, they need to take a more austere approach to fiscal policy in these first 2 years. So that's kind of the same direction as we had with the previous government.
Okay, now thanks, Mario. So now I'd like to address this next question first to you, Luciano. And how does Lula election can impact your medium-term forecast for Brazil in terms of GDP, inflation, and also the Selic rate?
Yeah, that will depend on what kind of fiscal policy Lula will adopt. I have my fingers crossed that he will be adopting an austere fiscal policy, as Mario said. But I think given that that the Workers' Party has this idea that the government should be this driver of growth. They will not be as austere as Brazil needs to control its debt, right? So if they, even assuming that the Lula administration will not be as heterodox like Dilma Rousseff was when she was in power, even that because of the room for maneuver, it's quite narrow. And as I mentioned, the growth will be slower next year. And you have already a large share of the government budget that is mandatory. So there is no, that it's difficult for the government to cut expenditure except when that needs it, they cut, in general, they cut investment. But Lula said that he wants to increase public investment. So I think what we will see is a government that will keep a fiscal policy supportive to growth, that will bring higher growth in the short term, but will impact the perception in terms of fiscal risk or debt risk. And so we will see a short-term higher growth than if we adopted a austere fiscal policy, but long-term or potential growth will be lower, right? And that means higher inflation and higher interest rates compared to the alternative, which would be an austere, a truly austere fiscal policy.
Thanks, Luciano. So, guys, let me ask to you guys to limit your answers for 1 or 2 minutes for us to cover more topics during this conversation. And Rodrigo, I have the same question for you about the forecast for the GDP, inflation, and also interest rate. And then let me include an additional question for you, because currently you have discussions under the transition team to approve your extra budget for the next year. The local media is reporting about the 200 billion reais. Do you see chances for this approval in the next few weeks about this extra amount? Thanks.
That's the 200 billion question. Well, I think there is space. I mean, everything can happen, during the transition period and during the new administration. I don't expect that very unorthodox measures will be taken by the new administration. As Luciano mentioned, and I couldn't have said it better, fiscal austerity will be a key driver of Brazilian growth, stable inflation, stable interest rates. So, and in addition to fiscal policy, I don't want to say the word hostage, but Brazil is still very dependent, not dependent, but Brazil feels strongly what happens in the outside world. So it depends on what will happen in the war at Ukraine and Russia, economic crisis, US interest rates. So there are several factors that may impact our local scenario here. But I think that all conditions remain stable. We already have contracted growth for 2023, and assuming that fiscal policy is maintained in an austere way, and that the reforms that are necessary for the country to continue to grow, if they are approved, then we'll see more foreign investments, more confidence in the country, and what investors need, previsibility. So considering all that, I'm confident and optimistic. But again, it depends. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer, but it depends.
Yeah, sure. I see your point, Rodrigo. And Mario, which kind of scenario in terms of economy do you expect for Lula administration? And also, I replicated the same question to you, because the approval of the extra budget during this transition team, the transition government will depend on the political relationship. Do you see room for that?
Yeah, the most difficult part of the discussion is whether what kind of manner he will, what kind of legislative solution he will come up to pass this, because there is a sense that Congress would prefer a constitutional amendment, but those are very difficult to pass. You need two houses voting with a qualified quorum. So, I mean, it's always difficult, especially if you consider that you have 1 month, a little more than 1 month to do so. And at least around 30% of the Congress that was elected is not. So, I mean, the current Congress, around 30% wasn't reelected or going elsewhere. So it's a difficult task. And I do not see 200 billion reais or 175, which is the latest number. I think that's too much of an ask. I think they will get some room for the social welfare programs. They will find some room to mend some of the budget cuts that were proposed by the current government. That, for instance, something for the school lunches or for medication. So they will get some of that back, but I really don't see the current Congress giving them the full amount that they're asking. But and this is something. This is a negotiation. You ask more to get less. So I think all in all, we will probably get some waiver. But that waiver, I only see the market accepting this and not fully repricing Brazilian assets if they also have shortly a very good finance minister, either a guy that's more of a pro-market type, a more liberal pro-market type of minister, or PT politician that doesn't have a lot of, I mean, like a good politician, but not a guy that has a lot of opinions regarding heterodox opinions regarding how to run economy. So basically, a guy that would be closer to what Palocci was in Lula's first term than Mantega. So you need to have this in place for the market to actually see, okay, they're getting this waiver now, but they are going to tighten the belt as soon as the next the government fully starts. Unless we have, like I said, the room to make things right is a very short room. They cannot waste this room making any sort of mistakes. So they are running on a tight schedule and on a tight rope.
Okay, and now, guys, talk about the segments. Rodrigo, can you share your view about what sectors you see positive or potential positive impacts and under the Lula administration, and why?
Sure. Well, if the new administration takes the same approach as they did in prior governments with social spending on FIES, on Minha Casa Minha Vida, I would be biased towards real estate, especially low-income real estate, mainly because of FIES and the expansion of social programs, including Bolsa Família. I would also think about clean energy players because of the agenda, not only the energy generators, but companies that service the industry. I think that would be a good bet. Another and infrastructure as a whole because of how BNDES may act. And I would say health. Healthcare has taken an increased care or attention during the COVID, and I think this new administration will certainly take measures to further this sector. So I would say real estate, health, and clean energy. Wild guesses.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that too. And how about you, Luciano? Which sectors you see more positively impacted? And also, I'd like to explore with you a little bit about the mining segment. So far, the Lula administration is not so clear about the plans for the mining sector. And you know that there is agenda pro environment, and this is likely to impact the licenses in terms of the mining projects. which sectors you see more positively affected by Lula administration, and what to expect for the mining segment as well?
Yeah, well, I agree with Rodrigo, and I will add the retail sector as because of more social welfare programs, use of state-owned banks to expand credit. So retail sector is expected also to benefit from the new administration. Okay, in terms of the mining sector, yes, I think that there'll be they want Petrobras to increase investment, and they also want to increase investment in renewable energy. So I think it will be a sector that will see a lot of investments, so probably Brazil will this sector will improve or increase the role in the overall investment of the economy. And I think it's important also to mention about the reforms, right? Because we have I think we have we are in a good position to make progress in the tax reform, and this would have I think a significant impact on the business environment overall in Brazil, because the tax system is quite complex in Brazil, and this is a big burden on the business on businesses in Brazil. And I think the debate's mature enough for us to see progress next year, and this I think overall will improve the business environment, will increase in terms of we improve productivity and international efficiency of the economy or competitiveness as well. So I think this is something that could bring more optimism and kind of offset some fiscal concerns that I think will grow over time due to this slower growth expected in the short term that will, or higher social demand for more spending, and then will push the Lula's administration to increase fiscal support, and this tax reform could offset at least partially offset these concerns, fiscal concern that I think will grow over time.
Sounds good. And Mario, the same question for you, but let me add a new element here too, to check with you also the sectors that are likely to has a negative impact as well under Lula administration. Which one can be positively impacted and the other ones negatively impacted?
I agree with Luciano on the retail. I think it's probably something that maybe services too, but both for looking at market perspective, I think retail sales will probably the retail sector will probably gain. Private education also may stand to gain. But in terms of and also even agriculture, I think we can get with a more environmentally friendly administration, we can get a lot of ESG money for sustainable agricultural practices, which are basically what has been done by the major tradings that operate here. So I think they stand to gain with even opening markets abroad. With the better foreign relations, we can also hope to open some markets for Brazilian rural products in Europe, which is always difficult. But if you actually manage to get the Mercosur EU deal signed, it's something that could be of a benefit. So far I'm negative on Petrobras. I don't think Petrobras I still think that they see Petrobras as a part of the administration and not as a company that has to operate as a company. So I think I'm not just looking at dividends and all. This is something that I mean could be bad for some investors, but you could equate this somehow. But I'm actually concerned with whether if oil prices become too high, whether the Petrobras will take some financial losses to sell product cheaper in Brazil to aid inflation, fighting against inflation. So I don't think they're gonna. This is gonna be as bad as it was in Dilma's government. Like I think Dilma's government was so bad in economic, macroeconomic management that I don't think that they will be as bad. But you know, there's an issue there. A lot of what was bad on Dilma's administration was because she fully took the PT's program to a T. So it's not like they will need to forget, you know, like forget a lot of what they believe it's the way to proceed, to actually do not replicate those mistakes. So in terms of Petrobras, I'm a little negative at the moment. I think I need more information than what I have been getting from this new transition government to be more positive on Petrobras. I think that this is something that's probably going to be hurt, especially in the short term.
Okay, thanks, Mario. And how about you, Rodrigo? What sectors do you see with more potential negative impacts? And also, Rodrigo, let me addition a question from the audience about the potential tax reform in Brazil in the energy segment, especially renewables sector. You have some tax incentives. With a potential tax reform, do you see any impacts, any changes on those tax incentives or not?
Yeah, talking about the negative sectors, I'm not very negative about it. I think the new administration will take a very pragmatic approach, but I agree with Mario. Petrobras has always been used as a as an arm of the government for several other reasons and not as a true corporation. So I think the government-owned entities may suffer a little bit because of interference, but we need to wait and see. Maybe they'll take a more pragmatic approach, a more market-friendly approach. Uh, as to your question, I also like to mention about mining that Luciano talked about. I think mining, we all know it's not the most environmental friendly industry, but we have examples of companies, especially in Brazil. For example, we have a steel producer in Maranhão that won the Oscar of the carbon neutral steel companies in the world. So there may be ways that we can find to compensate pollution and greenhouse emissions. So I'm confident that we'll find a way to allow the polluting industries to function in a way that is also ESG friendly. And again, as Mario mentioned, we have a huge opportunity in the agro sector to change the view as a very damaging sector to the country and the economy as a sector that brings ESG investments. And I think we will be able to do that because the agri sector, although with various different views about what is the right and wrong things to do, they're very sophisticated and they understand the dynamics of the market. So I'm very positive about the potential for ESG financing in that sector. As to your question about tax reforms, I'm confident that the tax reform will include incentives for renewable energy. So I think this will be, if not the main topic of the government agenda, one of the key points, because Lula is very pragmatic. He understands that not only to attract foreign investment, but also to make foreign trade viable, agreements between Mercosur and the European Union. He needs to have a green agenda, and he will make sure we have the green agenda, and we also benefit from the green agenda. So bringing investments and being seen in the global stage as a clean country. So I have a positive view, and I think there will be tax incentives. In addition to, we have the the FX, o marco regulatório FX legal mark issued by the former administration, and there was a change in law that now clearly permits linking PPAs, power purchase agreements, to US dollars, and that we will see much more foreign investment in such sectors. So there will be, in my view, a big shift in the renewables energy sector in Brazil, and I'm very positive towards it.
Great, sounds good, Rodrigo. Nice one. So, Luciano, let me back to you now about talk in terms of the future of privatizations in Brazil. And also let me take this opportunity to check your opinion about the concessions agenda and also PPPs in Brazil. The current administration of President Bolsonaro was very engaged in terms of privatization, concessions, and the PPPs. What to expect under Lula administration?
Yeah, privatizations, I think, as I mentioned before, I think we will see this a setback in this kind of policies. So, and this, I think I think will be a bad decision because Brazil has a low savings rate, and as I mentioned, the government fiscal accounts, it's quite deteriorated. So you have gross debt high. Brazil, before this rebound from the pandemic, was running primary deficits, budget deficits. So we need the private sector to invest, to increase the investment rate of the economy, which is quite important to improve potential growth, right? But it seems that the Workers' Party has this conviction that the state should have a large role in the economy and kind of avoid the private sector taking state-owned companies. The way they did in the past, and I think they will do it, is because move with PPPs, right? Public-private partnerships, and also making concessions. So this is kind of balanced between get a good balance between what the rhetoric used by the Workers' Party and also the need of having private investment in the economy. So I think they will go in this way, so they not get contradictory against what they say. So I think we will see some progress in terms of concessions and PPPs, but privatizations, I think we will not see under the Lula's administration.
And how about you, Mario? What's your opinion about the agenda of concessions, PPPs, and lately privatization as well?
I agree with Luciano. I don't see a lot of room for privatization, mostly because this conflicts a lot with what the PT's ideology. I don't see them like some people were afraid, oh, can they review the privatizations that were made? But no, I don't see room for that. The Congress wouldn't take this into any sort of form. So I think what has been done is done, and now looking forward, probably, I mean, maybe not even the post office. They're probably not gonna sell. Petrobras also, at least Petrobras already sold most of the assets that they had to sell. So I don't think. But on the other side, concessions, we're probably gonna see them. It's important in terms of, especially infrastructure concessions. It's important to see if they do not change the model that has been taken in the last auctions that we had, that were very successful auctions. So it always depends on. It's not just about selling, but also how you do. How do you sell the contracts? So basically, if they do not, I haven't really I haven't really heard any changes that would propose into those systems. So if they do not change this, if they just follow the concession program as it was, because it wasn't like a big innovation from Bolsonaro's government. It actually came from Temer. So they basically just took the ball rolling and kept it rolling. So I think it would be for the best if they just keep the ball rolling and do not rock the boat.
And how about you, Rodrigo? And also, I'd like to include the question about the privatization of ports in Brazil, especially because the Santos port privatization was at a kind of advanced level. Of course, the correct name is a concession, but you can consider that it has a privatization. How do you see the advance or not for the port's assets and also in terms of privatization under Lula?
Yeah, I agree with Luciano and Mario that we won't see privatizations at the federal level, and we won't see a reversal of privatizations as well. So I think things will remain the same, and it will be interesting to see how the federal level will react to state privatizations, because I think we'll see privatizations at the state level. So I'm curious to see if they're gonna be publicly against it or just neutral and see what they do at the state level. And that's a good signal. Whatever they do, it will be a good signal of how they think. I think the biggest challenge is not the government per se or Lula per se, but the PT space, which is from an ideological point of view, is totally against privatization. So it's going to be interesting to see. When you mentioned about the ports privatizations, I would also mention the airports. We have so many infrastructure areas that need to be developed, not necessarily through privatization, but concessions, PPPs, and other models that were attempted in the past, such as like the alliance agreements in the past that were a big thing, and now they're gone. So I think we won't see again the typical privatizations, but we'll see arrangements between private sector and public sector to further develop the infrastructure, logistical, pillow of Brazil, if you will. I'm sorry I don't get into specifics, but I think from a conceptual point of view, they will find a way to support furthering the private sector in key areas without calling it privatization or aspects that would affect ideological challenges.
Okay, and the last question from my side, guys, it's about the international relations of Brazil under Lula administration. So I'd like to start with you, Luciano. What to expect for Lula administration in terms of the relationship with Brazil, China, Brazil, United States, and also talk about the relationship, what to expect with Latin America, in terms of Latin America, the relationship between Brazil and Latin America.
Yeah, I think Brazil will try to remain neutral regarding China relationship with China and the US, so will not take a part because both are quite important trade partners of Brazil, right? And in Brazil, I think could benefit from this increase in trade tensions that we saw over the past years between the US and China. And by staying neutral in this case, you can be an alternative for both, right? So I think, and also the kind of allies that each of these big countries has now. So I think the best approach, and I think Lula will adopt this kind of approach, is being neutral and try to benefit the most from this kind of ruptures that we are seeing in the globalization and global trade patterns that we are seeing. And what was the other question? Oh, about the Latin America. Yes.
Exactly.
So yes, I think I think there will be no giving privileges to Latin America economies. I think Brazil, Latin America economies, Brazil is by far the largest Latin America economy, right? So if the Latin America economies like Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, I think they will benefit if Brazil do well in terms of growth, in terms of managing the economy. So, but I don't think we will see giving some, privileges for some countries. It was in the past, Lula did lean more towards the left-wing governments in Latin America, but this he was highly criticized, given that the bad state of these economies nowadays. So I think that he will be more careful and being more neutral in terms of international trade.
Okay, thanks, Luciano. And how about you, Mario? What to expect in terms of relationship of Brazil with China, US, and across Latin America?
I think it's the relationship with China is probably going to improve politically, but economically, it's going to remain the same. The China needs raw goods, commodities. Brazil provides most of what they need. It's something that we need to be concerned regarding, like the China investments in soybean in Africa, for instance. So it's something to look, but I think Brazil will still be a key trading partner to China. So I don't see a lot of change there. In terms of the US, it's going to improve mostly because we lost a lot. We lost a lot after Biden won the election, mostly because Bolsonaro decided that he still wanted to be a part of Trump's alliance and not with a country-to-country relationship. So it's going to improve politically, and also the relationship with the full European Union is going to improve. With the other countries here, neighboring countries, it's always something of a pragmatic. Brazil is very pragmatic in terms of foreign policy. It changed somewhat in Bolsonaro's administration, but Brazil is very pragmatic. So it's probably going to remain the same. Whoever wins the election in Argentina, with the current Colombia or Chile or Venezuela, it's going to remain the same. It's not going to. If it changes, it's going to change for the better, I suppose.
Thanks, Mario. And you, Rodrigo, how do you see the international approach under Lula administration?
Yeah, I think it will be, as Luciano and Mario mentioned, a very pragmatic approach, neutral, maintaining a safe distance from global issues and maintaining a health proximity from the global stage in key areas such as clean energy, and interaction between emerging economies. So I'm confident that it won't be affected other than the visibility and the feel of the other countries towards Brazil. With respect to Latin America as a whole, given the pink wave, I think dialogue will improve, certainly, and that's not necessarily bad. I think there has been increased scrutiny over offshore financings from Brazil, and that will likely not occur anymore or occur in a lower level. But it's good. I mean, it's better to dialogue than to not dialogue. And Lula has, a better intersection with Venezuela, with Petro in Colombia, Boric in Chile. So we expect to see more dialogue, and dialogue can lead to, commercial arrangements and better deals for everyone. But I don't expect to see, given the deglobalization trend in the world, I don't expect to see, huge commercial trade improvements, but more of a global stage repositioning of Brazil.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thanks, Rodrigo. Thanks, Luciano, and thanks, Mario, for the insights shared during this conversation. And now I'm back to Sebastian.
Thank you, Rogerio. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for being part of this panel. It's been a great conversation. And again, remind all listeners that you can follow Lula's next steps on our platform, Business News Americas, BNamericas.com, with dozens of news stories, data, and reports. For those of you who are not yet clients, I invite you to visit BNamericas.com and check out the great content that we publish every day. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Clients change, businesses change. The world is transforming faster than ever, and the opportunities are there, waiting for us. Over 20 years of digital innovation have turned us into the leading business intelligence provider in Latin America. BNamericas has a database with thousands of industrial projects, company profiles, key contacts, news, reports, and data, all in one easy-to-use platform. Every day, more than 50 on-the-ground journalists and experts analyze the region's major industries. Explore projects that feature opportunities for your business. Find the companies participating in those projects and connect with their decision makers. Make the best business decisions with all the facts and insights you need about the industries that are driving the Latin American economy. Get timely reports with the latest news about projects, regulations, and investments. Stay on top of the business trends. Find out what the risks and opportunities are for your business by reading the reports and analysis of our on-the-ground experts throughout Latin America. Redefine your business strategy and choose the path to success. BNamericas, connecting opportunities.